The same letter, 1 Corinthians, where Paul told them to act like men, to grow up, he also told them to be like children. And Paul, though, is not the only one. We're going to look at 4 different passages, 4 different individuals who said something to the effect of act like children. And as we've seen, of course, in the other lessons, act like a man doesn't mean everyone needs to act like a man in every way or like a woman. But there are certain things, because God made man and woman and God made us mature, but God chose to bring us into this world immature. There are things in the nature of being a child that God intended when He created us and when He designed the plan. And there are things that are in children that God intends for those who are grown to look at and to notice and even to imitate. So let's look at 4 of those tonight. The first coming from 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 20, here really jumping into a context of the problems that go all the way back to really chapter 1, but in particular chapter 12, and what he teaches about spiritual gifts. That was one of many occasions of conflict among them. And so in that context, he says in verse 20, "Brethren, do not be children in understanding." And so he wanted the prophecy and the teaching to take place by which they would understand and mature in that. So don't be children in understanding. However, in malice, he says, be babes. In regards to malice, be like a child. Well, what is it about a child? One thing that's in the nature of every child is they are inexperienced. There are some things that they have never done and that would never even cross their mind to do. They have to be seen it. They have to be shown it. They have to see it in someone else. And so what Paul says here, especially because of the problems among them, is that you're too mature in malice. I want you to regress. I want you to back up in malice and be a babe. The word malice is sometimes just a broad word for wickedness, but then sometimes it's more specifically used of anger, resentment, bitterness towards someone that is in us, and we choose to keep it, and it festers and it grows. And so that grows towards other people. Of course, that can be in us for a number of different reasons. Why might it have been a problem in Corinth? Because, of course, many reasons, but one from a little bit of history that we can notice is Corinth, of course, being in a part of the Greek culture. And when you read some of the myths of the Greek gods, malice was common. They were malicious towards each other, and they were malicious often towards the mortals that displeased them in one way or another. So if the leaders act with maliciousness, with malice, then what are the followers going to do? You can rarely expect much more out of those who are following than what they see from those who are leading. And so there may have been, by the time that Paul wrote 1 Corinthians, I believe he had only been gone from Corinth for just a few months from the time that he first introduced the gospel. So you'd have had many who were spiritually immature, and then maybe definitely coming from a culture where malice was not warned against in the name of the gods. It was practiced often by the gods. And so here, many of these new Christians may have grown up in homes where they saw malice, lived in a society where malice was taught among the myths and where it was seen in different ways. And so many of them may have come to the gospel already mature in malice. And so he says, I want you to be babes in malice. Well, how do you regress in that area? If they were already mature in it, how could they ungrow or grow out of it? And in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, one of the contrasts, of course, to malice would be love. And so read with me 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 7. I'll just read the entirety of it and then go back and summarize a few of the sections. But just as I read, think in your mind, this is what love is and what love does. And think about malice as being the opposite. And so love suffers long. Malice doesn't. Think about that contrast as I read. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up. Love does not behave rudely. Love does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. So if we were to carry that over into chapter 14 where we were reading, or just keep it in its context of what was going on with the spiritual gifts, love is what would help them to be babes in malice. So love suffers long and is kind. Malice, on the other hand, wants there to be suffering, wants the object of his malice to suffer. But by love, I'm the one who's willing to suffer. Instead of rejoicing when someone does, or even trying to be the cause of someone suffering, I'm willing to suffer and be kind. Love does not envy, parade itself, is not puffed up. Malice feeds on a spirit of competition. We certainly need to pay attention to one another, but what malice does is sometimes creates things out of nothing in order to have some justifiable reason for the way that one person feels about another and thinks about someone else. And so a spirit of competition. Well, look at what they do, and we know they're doing that to try to get the attention because I'm secretly jealous that I'm not the one doing that and being recognized for that. Or, well, here's what I do and someone else doesn't do that. And so then because of malice, I create reasons for why they aren't doing what I'm doing, why they're not measuring up to me, the standard. And so these are the ways that malice works and the ways that malice thinks, and that just grows. Love, on the other hand, isn't involved in a competition, but values what I'm able to do by God's help and what others are able to do by God's help. Love even values what I cannot do, because when I have a limitation, then I become dependent on others. And that's a part of what God intends for us to work together, that we're not all a set of self-sufficient people, but that we are a set of dependent people, dependent on each other, so I can rejoice in what I can't do and even what others can't do. Love does not behave rudely, seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but malice does. Malice does not rejoice in the truth. Malice does not bear all things. Malice bears very few things. And then again, finds a reason to complain about how heavy their burden is. Malice does not believe all things, hope all things, or endure all things. With malice, in fact, then I have a reason to leave. I'm not going to be around them. And so move on somewhere else where that kind of person finds another set of problems. Love, on the other hand, bears and believes and hopes and endures all things. And so by love, I'll be inexperienced in malice, or if I have been shown a model of malice growing up, I've seen that maybe in my home, and so because of that, it's in me in many ways, then these simple instructions that Paul gives here will teach us to grow out of those things and to be babes in malice. So Paul talked in this way about teaching us to act like children. Maybe the most well-known, this is probably the one you're thinking about, Jesus taught us to act like children in Matthew chapter 18. His disciples often did not act like children. In what way? Well, me first. I get to be in the front of the line. We see that. Well, those are not the ways to imitate children, but that's what Jesus' disciples were doing. I want to be greatest in the kingdom. A mother came. Well, I want my sons to sit at your right hand and your left hand. And so in Matthew 18 and verse 4, Jesus says, therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child. Maybe there were a multitude of people there, or maybe some of the disciples' family, but somewhere there was a child there. And he points to this child and says, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So Jesus says children are humble. The opposite, the contrast would be those who are wise in their own eyes, those who are prudent in their own eyes, very confident, very self-confident. And again, children, of course, as they grow, they develop some of these traits, but children by nature are dependent creatures. And they are dependent before they even have the awareness to know that they are. They are automatically inherently dependent. And Jesus used that occasion to teach a lesson in Matthew 7. Remember where he said that if a son asks for a fish, will a father give him a stone? Well, why doesn't the child just go get the fish himself? Because he's dependent. Because, especially at the younger age, he knows, I don't know how to get a fish. My daddy knows how to get a fish. I'm dependent upon my father. I'll ask him for one. And he's not embarrassed to ask. We, on a variety of occasions and constantly, need to be reminded of how dependent we are. And part of that because we live in a society, this is not wrong, but tomorrow is Independence Day. As Americans, we value independence. That we need to think about being independent in many ways. That's acting like a man, taking responsibility. But we have to balance that with, we're also dependent. We are just as dependent as the youngest of children. Question is, do we act like it? Do we act in such a way that shows we understand we are dependent? When we worship, do we worship God like we are dependent upon Him? When Jesus taught the woman at Samaria that God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and truth, God is seeking true worshipers. One of the messages of that is to humble yourself and not to view worship as dependent upon you or primarily being for you. There's certainly a purpose that we all benefit from, but worship is first about God. And so our prayers and our songs need to be led and sung in a way that keeps God at the forefront of our mind and our demeanor, in everything that we reflect. When we lead or when we're working together, everything that we do should call to mind every participant that God is the one who's being worshipped. And that certainly then influences what we do. Everything we do, when God tells us what to do, we're dependent upon Him, we follow it. In some of the details that I talked about a little bit this morning, even in those where God didn't give the specific way to do it, what time we do it and where we're going to meet and those details, still though, God is at the forefront of those decisions and judgments, not me, because we're dependent upon God. Do we daily speak like we are dependent upon God? In James chapter 4, that's his admonition, as he reminds them in the course of making plans. And well, you're in charge of your plans. Well, to some degree, but James reminds us that instead of saying, well, we're going to go here and there and do this or that, as though we're confident in the outcome, it's okay to make plans, but he says, remember this, that you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. James isn't saying you've got to preface everything you say with that specific phrase, but it does have to be in your mind, in all of your plans. Don't be surprised if things change, because it isn't all dependent upon you. There's much that we don't see with our eyes, much we can't understand, that is out of our control, because we are dependent creatures. And so we should speak in a way and act in a way that acknowledges I am dependent upon the help of God. Secondly, act as children. Children are inherently ignorant. God could have brought us into this world with some knowledge already that we immediately have. Children have certain instincts, but children are inherently ignorant. As they grow, in the earlier phases, they don't try to fight that. They're just created in a way that they are ignorant, and they benefit from watching and from listening, and that's what builds the blocks in their mind as they develop. In 1 Kings chapter 3 and verse 7, as Solomon became king, he spoke as someone who recognized that he was ignorant. 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 7, there's more that could be said about this. But when God comes to him in the night and says, ask what you want and I'll give it to you, Solomon's answer, among other things, is that, now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David. But I'm a little child. I don't know how to go out or come in. Solomon, of course, was going to be given wisdom that exceeded that of anybody at that time and anyone in the future among mere men. And part of what laid the foundation for him being able to have great knowledge and wisdom was recognizing his own ignorance. We know we are ignorant without God, but again, do we act like it? Do we act like we are ignorant in the way that we lead? Again, there's a balance in this. Confidence in the things we have seen from others that are good, and confidence in what God has told us. But if we were to try to lead independent of God, then it's good for us to remind ourselves in the past how many times, if we had ignored God's help in our leadership, how destructive it would have turned out. And so in our home as parents, in our work as husbands, in our workplace, in the community, in our working together as a church, it's good for us to remember how ignorant each of us are and how dependent we are. And then that should motivate us to study. I need to study the Bible like someone who is ignorant. Not that I forget everything I've ever known, but like someone who's absorbing as much as I can so that I know what God says about intoxication and lasciviousness and faithfulness and all the roles of life, and what God says about nakedness and how the church should work together, and all these things. I need to constantly remind myself I don't within me have the answer. I need to learn. I am dependent, and as I keep that mindset, that helps to keep me humble. One other way in which children are humble is because they inherently imitate. No child has ever observed, well, everybody else walks on 2 feet. I think I'm going to try walking on my hands. And so they start their developmental process by trying to walk on their hands. Never happened. They don't have the consciousness to even try to do that. They are inherently imitators. Now later, they can grow up and be foolish and try a whole lot of different things. But in their youth, children imitate. And it's automatic. This is a weakness of our society that sometimes isn't because of an overemphasis on independence and individuality, which again, there's a balance in that. There's some benefits from that. But many times in our society, our society encourages it. You be you. You do what you do. Well, that maybe with some context to that. But the Bible does not emphasize the value and the virtue of individuality. But in our society, because of many of our freedoms and societal rights that maybe don't really come from God, but from our government, that opportunity arises. And so someone says, well, I'm going to be an individual. I'm not going to conform. And what do they usually end up doing? Conforming to other people who say, I'm not going to conform either. So they run into a dead-end road, and sometimes that leads them to sinful things. And so that's often a part of some of the sinful fads and trends in our society, like this gender fluidity. That's people who are saying, I'm not going to conform, and what do? They just conform to the nonconformists. It's a dead-end road. Often in our society, style and clothing trends are because of that. Well, I'm going to be an individual by the way that I dress. And so I'm not going to dress like everybody else. And so who do they dress like? Well, they just dress like the other people who say, I'm not going to dress like everyone else. It's a dead-end road. They're not as independent as they pride themselves to be, and that's often the root of it. Instead, there is a value, there is virtue to being willing to imitate. As adults, humility will help us to be willing to imitate. And that's what that's what Hebrews chapter 11 is there for. Why do we have a record of the life of people like Abel and Noah and Abraham? They weren't individualists. They weren't focused on trying trying to prove themselves as individuals. Their lives are recorded there because they were mocked, because they were different from the majority. And so Abel was not appreciated by Cain, and Noah was not appreciated by the people of his generation. But that wasn't what moved and persuaded Abel and Noah and Abraham. They were just trying to imitate the instructions that God had given to them. And so we have their examples before us. Be willing to imitate that kind of faith. And that's what we sung about just a few minutes ago. The book of Proverbs teaches the importance of imitating wisdom and being able to identify foolishness. And don't imitate the foolishness. Imitate wisdom. Imitate wisdom in our speech, in the use of our money, in the way that we work, and the kinds of things that we do for work. Not start from scratch and build it up on your own and do it your own way. No, in humility, imitate, because what is most important has already been done. In fact, most of the passages that say something like God dwelling with us, Christ dwelling in us, the Holy Spirit filling us, what that's really emphasizing is for us to imitate the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And so why does God call us His children? There are many lessons, no doubt. Part of that is to help us understand His affection and His love for us. But maybe by calling us His children, He's calling us to act like children, as Jesus pointed out, in humility. So Paul noticed this. Jesus pointed this out, and Matthew recorded it. The Apostle Peter, in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 2, he raises the illustration, illustrates a point from children. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 2. In contrast to malice, similar to the point that we noted that Paul made, he says, as newborn babes, desire the pure milk of the Word, that you may grow thereby. So act like a child, act like a newborn babe, as someone who desires milk. Of course, here our mothers would have the greatest representation. What would be a word that would describe a child who desires milk? Intense, persistent, urgent, and their minds can't be changed. That's the nature of a newborn child. So what words would represent your desire for the milk of the Word? Would it be hot? Would it be cold? Would it be lukewarm? Would it be steadfast, like those in Jerusalem in Acts chapter 2? Or would it be inconsistent? Sometimes I am, and other times I'm bored with it. Or would it just be absent? What words would describe your desire for spiritual milk? Deepening, a deepening desire, or a withering desire? And whatever the answer is to those things, I can give an answer that might reflect my true desire. It might not reflect my true desire. But whatever the real answer to that question is also a reflection, is always the answer to the question, what word would describe your spiritual condition? Your spiritual desire is your spiritual condition. And so we could go back through the same list. We all desire something like a newborn babe's desires the milk. We all desire something or some things like that. What are they? What are they for you? And really the best way to answer that question would be to look at this past week and what are the things that of your own volition, of your own choice, of your own priority, you chose to do, and those things were going to happen, and it didn't matter anything else, those were going to happen as far as the things within your control. And then what were the things you intended to do, you wanted to do, but you just didn't get to them? Because that can help you sort out your values and what is most important and what you desire for. And then this coming week, if you reflect on the past week and it wasn't what it ought to have been, God has given us a new week, and so let your priorities define and to drive the decisions that you are allowed to make this week. Let them be such that they would reflect your desire as a newborn babe. And then go to Psalm 19. And the desire that Peter emphasizes, to be akin to Jesus saying, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." But he describes it as the milk of the Word. Well, let's talk for just a minute, think for a moment about what is being desired. Think about the pure milk of the Word. Psalm 19, verses 7 through 9. Notice how this describes the pure milk of the Word in a few other words. The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. The so-called theory of macroevolution, people give answers to that, but that they are really not sufficient to answer. Among them would be, how long did it take for the milk of mammals to develop over how many ever years their theory says, in order for the right ingredients to come into play that are necessary for the growth and development of the child? The milk that a mother provides for her child has all of the ingredients that that child needs in order to grow. Well, how did that mother grow without it? That was an essential part of her development. Well, likewise, just as milk is made for the child, the Word of God has all of the ingredients that our spirits need to grow, and that also is no accident. For your spirit to grow, you have to have something perfect. And the law of the Lord is perfect. It converts the soul. It can change the soul. The law of the Lord is sure. You can have complete confidence in it. If knowledge and of wisdom, if that's the destination you want to arrive at, well, the testimony of the Lord will get you there. The pure milk of the Word is right. It always does what it's supposed to do. The pure milk, the milk of the Word is pure. In other words, it's not mixed with anything. And that's one of the many accusations that are being made against the Bible, that, well, maybe there was some original things that Jesus said, but we don't know if Jesus said all these things. The Bible has passed through the hands of so many different religious groups and translators, it just might not be as pure as it once was. The law of the Lord is pure. It is clean. In our food language, it has all natural preservatives and no expiration date. It provides what it originally was designed to provide, and the passing of time doesn't change that. And then the milk of the Word is true and righteous. There's no hidden conspiracy. And again, that's another one of the accusations that are persuading some people or planting enough doubt in the minds of many people so that they've never read the Bible, and it even persuaded their parents of that, so that those parents never read the Bible to their children because they were made to believe it is not true and righteous altogether. But the milk of the Word is pure. We can have that confidence in it, and it accomplishes, it meets the needs of those for whom it was designed and for whom it was intended. And so when we have that kind of confidence that this is what the Bible, this is what the Word of God will accomplish, this is what it was made to do, well, then that helps our desire to grow, our confidence in it. And as our confidence grows, our desire should grow. And as our desire for the pure milk of the Word grows, then in that area, then we'll learn to act like children. It's urgent, it's essential, and there will be nothing that will get in my way from having the pure milk of the Word. And then one more, turn to Psalm 131. We have Paul, we have Peter, we have Jesus teaching us to act like children. One more, the psalmist. presumably of David. Psalm 131 teaches us to be content like children. And again, keep it in its context. The newborn babe is not content, but that actually provides an illustration for the point that is being made here. Psalm 131 says, Lord, my heart is not haughty, nor my eyes lofty. Neither do I concern myself with great matters, nor with things too profound for me. Surely I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with his mother. Like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forever. So in verse 1, he says, I've learned self-control. I've learned to direct my desires and to direct my concerns in such a way that when there's something I don't have that I want, I'm not flustered. And when I don't get what I want, I'm not overly worried and concerned about it. I don't concern myself too much with those things. In verse 2, he says, I've learned to calm and quiet myself, just like a weaned child. So now, this is a child who's moved from the newborn phase. Now this is a child who has been weaned to be content without his mother's milk. He's not without his mother, but he's content without his mother's milk. The newborn babe is troubled immediately, can't think, do anything else until he has the milk. Now here's a child who's grown and developed to a degree that he can be content without his mother's milk, calm and in control. And this is what the psalmist said that he had learned to do. He has learned to act like a child. And then in verse 3, he urges Israel to do the same thing. Israel had often gotten themselves into a frenzy. Well, we have some enemy. We're surrounded by these nations. How are we going to conquer them? We need a king like they have a king. Oh, they have chariots. We need to have chariots. Our chariots need to be pulled like horses. We need the best military technology and weapons that there are because we've got to protect ourselves. No, the psalmist says in verse 3, don't put your hope in chariots and in kings and in false gods and false prophets and with wealth. Just calm and quiet yourself like a weaned child. How often did Israel learn that lesson? Not very often, but some did. The writer of this psalm, presumably David, did. And so he's urging them to do the same. And therefore he's urging us to do the same, to learn like a child, to overcome the struggles that we have when we struggle with self-control, when we struggle with some intense desire. The psalmist says that God can help us to be calm and quiet like a weaned child. We're all in the process of learning that, and we're all, as I assume all people have, influenced by our society and the things that our society struggles to or pursues with strong desire. We see that, we're surrounded by that, and so if we don't resist it and teach and train ourselves, as the psalmist described himself, we'll follow them right into that. We are constantly shown and told why we should want more, why we should expect more and bigger and better and upgraded and the latest. We are bombarded by messages, by advertisements, and an advertisement is meant to promote a product, of course, but it's not just that. There are professional psychologists who are behind the advertisements. And I don't know all their tricks, but I know companies have a huge budget. There's something effective about the words and the pictures and the phrases and the songs that they implant in us, and doesn't mean just because we hear it we have to automatically follow it. But if we are not taught and trained, if we're not constantly learning what the psalmist says here, to be calm, quiet, to be content, then we're going to have a struggle, we're going to have a battle to shut out all that noise and to be persuaded to be constantly chasing the next big upgrade. We live in a prosperous society, and so many of us, myself is included, have grown up getting far more than we worked for. I think I've surpassed that now that I'm 45, but by the age of 10 or 15, if I put all my possessions in a pile, how many did I work for and earn, and how many did I just get by doing nothing, by showing up at the Christmas tree? That pile was much bigger than the other. Now, that's not sinful, but I'm just saying that's in our society. There is an imbalance in how much we get, how much we earn, and how much we give. And if there isn't teaching, if there is not training and ongoing learning in contentment, then that imbalance will consume us as we grow. And I believe that's present in our society among adults. Proverbs 19 verse 10 says, luxury is not for fools. Because fools get a pile of stuff, fools get a pile of money, and they lose their mind. They don't have the contentment, the calm, the quietness of spirit like a weaned child to know what to do and what not to do, what to seek out and what to just leave alone. Our society is losing in many ways the teaching and the training, not the ability to do that, but the training and the self-control and the quietness and the contentment. And if we're going to resist that, if our children are not going to be consumed by that, we're going to have to, in the language of the 131st Psalm, learn to calm and quiet our souls and not concern ourselves with great matters and with things too profound, things that are larger for us, that are not helpful to us. In Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 10 and 11, Solomon offers us this warning in regards to chasing the gold and silver. If we're not calm and quiet and content, well, he who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. So what profit have the owners except to see them with their eyes? In other words, you don't enjoy it like you think you're going to enjoy it. It's going to be lost much quicker than you realize. And so for us, do we spend more time using what God has given to us for the purposes that He has given them to us? Or do we spend more time using what we have as a means of having more? And so then when we have more, now we have a means to have more. Which one is going to be calm and quiet and content? And which one is going to be stressed and strained because they're looking for the next? Act like children, like the weaned child. And then in Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 12, of making many books there is no end, and much study is wearisome to the flesh. We live in a society consumed by money and prosperity. We live in a society consumed by knowledge. Nothing wrong with knowledge and learning what we can, of course. But do we spend more time using what we have learned, growing in knowledge and growing in wisdom, or do we end up neglecting what we have learned, chasing the knowledge of something else and the knowledge of something else, and we end up learning a lot about things that are of lesser importance and forgetting the things that we already knew that were of greater importance? Which one? Which person is calm and quiet and content? They're both learning something, but who is calm and quiet and content? Who is like a child? The psalmist tells us, along with Jesus, along with Paul, along with Peter, to act like a child. Are children born sinners? That is a teaching that dominates the religious world that we live in. I don't know how often, how prominently that's taught, but many religious groups in Fairbanks, a fundamental teaching is we're born into this world sinners, or if not that, we're born into this world with a sinful nature. Well, how ironic it would be then that throughout the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, we are told to act like children. course, that teaching is not true. God says, pay attention to your children, to your grandchildren, to your nieces, to your nephews, to the children around you in their innocent years. Be converted and become as little children. Turn your songbooks to number 610. The way that we respond to what we read is a test of our willingness, not our ability. We're able to grasp this concept, but of our willingness to act like children. If you're here tonight and you are conscious, you understand your sin and that the soul who sins shall die and that you're separated from your God, then like a little child, humble yourself and ask for what you need. Ask for the help and for the forgiveness you need from your God. If you're not a Christian, then your help is requested, your appeal is made. When by faith that Jesus is the Christ, you confess that faith. And by faith in the working of God, you're baptized into Christ. As a Christian, if you need to return your heart and soul and mind and strength to the one who gave it to you, if sin and distraction has taken you away from Him, and if our prayers will stir you up to love and good works, that's why we've gathered. If we could help you in some way, come forward and tell us how as we stand and sing.